because the devil did break me. Hi guys, it's Izzy, and in today's video we are going to be doing my December wrap up. Yes, it is very late, but I needed to focus on my end of year videos before I could do my wrap up, because I thought, you know, I can talk about my wrap up at any time, and the middle of January is when we're going to talk about it. I read 25 books in December. Don't really know how. I was sick for like a whole week of December, but I did listen to some audiobooks during that time, so, you know. None of them were that impressive except for like a handful. It was a bit of a mediocre month, unfortunately, but we best get started so that we're not here for 5 billion hours. You're welcome. Also, you may be thinking, she's wearing that jumper again, and basically if it's not Christmas, this is my winter wardrobe. I just wear this jumper every time it gets washed. I never change it. It's a problem. I'm addicted to this jumper. It's my favourite jumper ever. I love it. Sorry, I wear it in like basically every video. The first book I read was The Guinevere Deception by Kirsten White, and I gave this book 2 stars. Did not enjoy it at all. This is a retelling of like Camelot and like King Arthur, etc., and it follows our main character Guinevere, who's not actually Guinevere, hence the Guinevere Deception, and she marries Arthur so that she can protect him because she's a witch and like he's, I don't know, in danger. Stuff happens. But the main problem was not much happened, and I was just really bored. I listened to the audiobook of this, and just every time I turned it on I wanted to fall asleep because I was so bored. It really was just nothing special, nothing I haven't seen in any form of like Camelot retellings. Camelot, King Arthur, Merlin are like some of my favourite stories. I absolutely loved them. I loved the BBC TV show Merlin. That was my life when I was younger, and I pretty much love anything to do with Merlin or Camelot or whatever, so that's why I picked this book up, because it was to do with Camelot, so I figured I would love it, but it was a real disappointment, unfortunately. It only got 2 stars, and in my review I just said, every time they mention trees or the word unmade, I just thought about how much I would rather be reading The Raven Cycle instead, or basically any book. I won't be reading the sequel unless there's some good female content, but I doubt that. I liked the general feminist themes, but the book was as boring as watching paint dry. So a glowing review from me. I then read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I won't bore you in talking about this book very much because it is in my favourite books of 2019, and just in case you haven't watched it, spoiler time, it's number 1. I love this book with my entire heart. It belongs in a museum because it's a work of art. It follows our main character Zachary, and he discovers a book that has a lot of stories about this place called the Starless Sea, and he tries to kind of find another copy of it, or like who the author was, and try and like find other stories, and he can't find anything, and he has no idea where this book came from, who wrote it, like how it came to be in his like university library, and that sets him off on a quest to solve a lot of puzzles and enter the Starless Sea. And that's a terrible job at explaining what this book is about, but it's so hard because it's just genius. I love it. It's one of my favourite books of all time, maybe my favourite book of all time, like if we're not including like Harry Potter and stuff. This is probably my favourite book of all time. So, pretty glowing reviews. If you haven't read it, please read it. Please read it. Like, it's so good. And also it has this really cool like key, bee and sword thing, which is like all part of the book, and I love that it has like this bee on the front, the sword on the side, and the key on the back. I just love the cover. It's so creative and cool. And if you want to hear more of my thoughts, I'll put my favourite books of 2019 thingy in the card. So because I'm a professional YouTuber, I know how to do a card thing. I'm so fancy. Look, there's a card. Ooh, click on it. Listen to me talk about my favourite books. good video, if I do say so myself. I then reread Autobiography by Christina Lauren. This follows our main character Tanner, and he lives in, I don't remember where, but it's a very Mormon place, and he is bisexual, but he's not really out to anyone because he's out to his family, but his family told him like not to come out publicly because they live in such a Mormon dominated place. And he signs up for this like writing course they have at this school, which is like really hard to get into, and basically you write a book in a semester. And one of the like teaching assistants is a previous student. He was last year's class of whatever, so he's only a year older than Tanner, and they sort of start to have a romance because he's helping out in class and they really like each other. And then Tanner ends up basically writing his book about Sebastian, which doesn't really work out well, and Sebastian is Mormon, so it really discusses religion, sexuality, all that kind of stuff. I think it does a brilliant job of not demonizing the Mormon church, but also recognizing a lot of the faults and flaws and shame that surrounds the church and their beliefs. And I think it was a really balanced view and really took in both sides of the conversation, and I just really loved the relationship between Sebastian and Tanner, even though it was fraught with difficulties, that's for sure. And I gave that like 4.5 stars. I really love it. It's a good book. I then read The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I'm not 100% sure how you pronounce that. And I gave this book 3 stars, which I know is a bit controversial because I believe this won the Goodreads choice for Best Thriller of 2019. And I know a lot of people really love it. And basically it follows this woman who allegedly killed her husband and then hasn't said a word since, and she's in this psychiatric prison unit thing with other women, and a new therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, don't know the right word, starts at this facility, and he like decides to make it his project to find out what happened and why this woman stopped talking and whether she did actually kill her husband. I enjoyed the reading experience. I had a good time reading it. It was entertaining, it was quite quick, like I didn't get too bored at any point, but I completely guessed the ending. And I know people say like, oh my god, I like had no idea, but like, I don't know, it just seemed really obvious to me. But like, there's a lot of books where I don't guess the ending, and then there are a lot of books where I do, so I think it's just like random. I'm just good at telling when people are shady. I just have like a shady radar. Like, I just know when people are shady. So I'm really good at knowing who's the villain who did whatever the crime, I don't know. And yeah, so it was a bit disappointing because I did guess the ending, but I still gave it 3 stars because I had a good time reading it, so it wasn't a complete disappointment. And while I did guess the ending, I did think it was like executed well, so like I still had a good time reading it. It just wasn't anything mind-blowing for me personally. I then read Let's Call It a Doomsday by Katie Henry, and I gave this book 3 stars. This book follows 2 characters, one who has, I guess she has like OCD kind of, but she's basically obsessed with the fact that the world's gonna end, and she like collects like supplies for when the world ends, so she's like prepared. And in her like therapist's office she meets another girl who tells her that she's had like a vision or like a dream of when the world's going to end, and so they kind of become friends because they're both kind of feeding each other's like mental health issues, I guess, and kind of their thoughts and feelings, and I guess it creates this bubble where they feel like they're both right because like they have each other. And yeah, it just follows these 2 girls on their journey. It was okay. It wasn't anything special. It wasn't anything bad. It was just very middle of the road. I wasn't entirely sure what the book was trying to achieve. I don't really feel like it had a purpose necessarily. It was mainly just about this girl and her mental illness and I guess like therapy and stuff. Her previous book, Heretics Anonymous, I really enjoyed, and I felt like that really had a purpose of what it was trying to do, and this book just felt kind of lost, like it didn't really know where it was trying to go with this story. I don't know, it just felt a bit lost. So yeah, it was okay, but it wasn't anything special. I then read Orphan Monster Spy by Matt Killeen, and this is a book set in World War II, and it follows our main character Sarah, whose mum has died basically, and she's kind of stranded in, I think she's in Germany. Is she in Germany? She's kind of stranded, she's half Jewish, and she doesn't really have anywhere to go, and she's trying to escape, and then she meets this man who agrees to like help her if she'll help him, and basically he asks her to go undercover into a Nazi school, a school for girls, and try and gather information about this like, I don't know, sciencey thing that could make or break the war. Something, she had to collect information on something, I don't really remember what that information was, but yeah, basically she has to infiltrate this school and kind of deal with being in the surrounding of her oppressors, who, if they knew that she was half Jewish, like wouldn't hesitate to like kill her or send her to a concentration camp or whatever. And it had a really interesting discussion on like the, you know, the other girls that were in this school and Sarah and how she felt, and this mysterious man who has sent her on this mission. And I gave this book 4 stars. I thought it was a really interesting plot, I thought it was a really interesting idea, and it was a really entertaining read. I flew through it because I just was really excited by it, and I think it was a really strong book. I believe it's going to be a duology, like the second book I think is coming out like this month or next month, and I will definitely be picking it up because it was a really good book, and the writing was great, everything about it was good. I then read Sick Kids in Love by Hannah Moskowitz, and I gave this book 4.5/5 stars. I loved this book. I wrote a kind of detailed review on Goodreads. I'll leave that down below if you want to hear my thoughts more, but this basically follows 2 teenagers who both have chronic illnesses, and they meet getting treatment for their illnesses. Our main character Hannah has rheumatoid arthritis, and our love interest Sasha, he has I don't know how you say it, Gaucher or Gaucher disease. I don't really know how you pronounce it, but yeah, this follows our main character Hannah, and she writes a column in either her school newspaper or her local newspaper, I don't remember, and she like asks people like random questions and then writes about it and writes her view. And her kind of thing is that she's a disabled girl who's like sworn off love basically, and we just kind of follow these 2 teenagers as they start to fall in love and what that entails for both of them, and kind of how they have to live their lives surrounding their chronic illness and always having that in mind. And it was just such a breath of fresh air to read a book about chronically ill teenagers. Neither of them are gonna die, but it does really impact their lives, and I liked how unapologetically this was about chronic illness, but it was also about their love and their relationship, and it was still funny and witty and a traditional contemporary. It just happened to surround chronic illness, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. It really meant a lot to me as a chronically ill, well, I'm 20 now, but I was a chronically ill teenager, and I just think if you're trying to read more diversely in 2020, this is a book you absolutely should pick up. It was done so well, and I really appreciated having a book that so accurately represented a teenage experience when you have to live your life around something that is a chronic illness. And I just really want more people to pick it up because I think it did a really good job at kind of showing all different sides of the experience. So I really implore you to pick it up. I then read These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. I'd been putting this one off for a while because I hadn't heard great things about it. Like, I know people were really excited for it, and then it didn't get like great reviews, but I gave it 4 stars. I actually had a good time reading it. This follows a character also called Hannah, and she's a witch. She's an elemental witch, and like they have like covens, and her whole family's like a witch, and she's recently broken up with her girlfriend who was also a witch in the same coven, and their relationship is quite fraught. And then they start getting these kind of like warnings of a blood witch being in town, and that's like a really bad thing. So she kind of has to investigate what's happening, like why this blood witch is following them, and kind of getting like staying safe and using her magic, and also being a teenager. And it's kind of hard to explain. Like, it's kind of fantasy but kind of contemporary. Like, it's a real like meet in the middle genre. I gave it 4 stars. I had a really good time reading it. I thought the plot was really engaging. The characters weren't overly engaging. Like, I didn't like fall in love with any of them, but they were like good enough. They just weren't, they didn't have a lot of depth, but I thought the overall book was really entertaining. I had a good time reading it, and overall I was really happy with the reading experience. And I think because I went in with quite low expectations, that really helped, because I went in thinking it wasn't going to be great, and when I had a good time, it was a really nice surprise. So if you've been a little bit put off and haven't read it, I would suggest picking it up. Like, it was a good book. It was solid, that's for sure. I then read Opal by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a very short novella that follows the ending of the Raven Cycle series. For some reason I never read it. I think it was only available on Kindle, and like I didn't really use my Kindle, but then I saw it was on Scribd, like the audiobook, even though it's only like an hour and a half or something, and so I just listened to it and it was really good. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. It follows Adam, Ronan and Opal, which if you've read the books you'll know who they are, and it was just like lovely and heartwarming, and I loved it, and I just wanted to listen to it forever, and I just wanted a whole book of them just living their life and being safe and not called out in the hawk where everyone's sad and scared and apart. It was just really sweet and I loved it. So if you ever need something to just like warm your heart a little bit and you've read the Raven Cycle series, I would highly recommend picking it up. It's short, but it's definitely worth a read, like 100%. I then read A Boy Called Christmas by Matt Haig, because you know it was coming up to Christmas, and this is a book that follows a boy whose dad like goes to find elves, I think, and he stays with his like grandma, but his grandma is horrible, and so he decides that he's gonna like follow his dad and go and find these elves. And so he goes to find these elves, and he finds like this magical world where like Father Christmas is and these elves are, and yeah, it's just like a magical story about Christmas. I think it's like middle grade, and it was just a really nice Christmassy story to get you in the mood for Christmas. So if next year you need a Christmassy book, it was a good one. It was nice, it was pure, it was short, it was a good time. I gave it 4 stars. It was good. Sorry these aren't like super detailed like reviews. I've forgotten quite a lot of my thoughts because it was a little while ago, so maybe that works in my favour though, because at least it shuts me up quicker. I then reread for the 3rd time in just over a year Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray and Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray. These are the 2nd and 3rd books in the Diviner series, and I read them to prepare for King of Crows, which I have now read, which is a crazy thing to say. I got an arc of it and I have read it. I'm not allowed to post my review until 2 weeks before the release date, so that will be on the 21st of January. So if you want to hear my thoughts on King of Crows, check my Goodreads. then follow me on Goodreads now. This is your reminder to follow me and befriend me on Goodreads. I have made it my New Year's resolution to write a full detailed review for every new book I read this year, which I'm already regretting because I've already read so many books and it takes forever to write reviews. But yeah, I'm really active on Goodreads at the moment and I'd really appreciate it if you were my friend on there or you followed me on there. I'd love to see you around. And yeah, I reread these two books. I don't need to go into detail, even though it was my third time reading Before the Devil Breaks You, it still made me cry because the devil did break me. And I love these books. If you don't know what they're about, watch any other of my videos. I literally talk about them all the time. It's my favourite series of all time and I love it so much and I can't believe I finished it. Gonna be honest, I've been having an existential crisis about it for the last few days. I finished it like 2 days ago and I'm having a crisis, so send help. I then also reread The Vanishing Star by Maureen Johnson. This is the second book in the Truly Devious series and I read it in preparation for the third and final book, which comes out on the 21st of January, I think. And so I just wanted to reread it to refresh my memory because the first time I read it I had the flu. I listened to it and turns out the flu doesn't allow you to remember a lot of the book. So I needed to reread it because I'd forgotten half of it. And this is a mystery series that follows our main character Stevie, who goes to this special boarding school called Ellingham Academy. And basically if you have a special interest and if you're like a prodigy in a certain thing, then you can go there and study and also really focus on your specialist subject. And Stevie's specialist subject is true crime and she decides that she's going to solve the crime that happened like 80 years ago or something, when the founder of Ellingham Academy's daughter and wife went missing, never to be found again. So she decides to solve the crime and that's what we follow. So we follow two timelines, the timeline of like the 1930s when this original crime happened and the current day timeline with Stevie trying to figure out what happened and also weird things happening in current day. I give the book originally 4 stars. It was kind of boring re-listening to it because I did remember a lot of like the first half, so I did get a little bit bored, but I do like the second one a lot more than the first one and I am really excited for the conclusion of the third one. I then read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott and this was a really lovely surprise. Classics are very hit or miss for me. I either really love them or hate them, and this was one that I really loved. I gave it more like a 4.5 star. I really loved it. It was just such a great reading experience and it was just such a lovely book. If you don't know, this follows 4 sisters in the 1800s, like 1860 I think, or something like that, and it follows mainly our main character Jo, and she wants to be a writer and she's a very free spirit and she loves her sisters more than anything, and basically she just wants to stay kind of free forever and be with her sisters, and she doesn't really want to get married and she doesn't really want to have children and she just wants to write and be with her family. And we follow these sisters and their relationship as they grow up and it's just so heartwarming and lovely. I loved it so much. It was just such a good book and one I would definitely be rereading basically every Christmas. It is quite Christmassy because a lot of the scenes take place around Christmas, but also it's just one of those warm and cozy books that are just really lovely and I will definitely be returning to this story. I do know there are sequels and I watched the 1980s movie adaptation and I can't wait to see the 2019 adaptation, but unfortunately I'm too poorly to go to the cinema at the moment, so I will have to wait until I can buy it online. So I shall wait and suffer until I can finally watch the masterpiece that I'm sure it is. And yeah, it was just really lovely. I haven't read the sequels. Like I said, I watched the 1980s movie and I didn't really like the progression of the story. I much preferred just sticking to Little Women because I know there's it kind of like follows them as they like grow up and get husbands and stuff, and like I don't really care for that. I did sob through quite a lot of Little Women because I didn't know what happened in the following books, and so I was really taken back and I really cried a lot, so that was fun. But yeah, I would highly recommend picking this classic up. If you're not a massive fan of classics like me, this was a really good one that was really easy to read, really engaging, and just a lovely story. I then read Fish in a Tree by Linda Mullally Hunt. I'm so sorry I butchered that. But this is a middle grade book that follows our main character, and she has a lot of trouble with school because she thinks she's stupid and dumb, and she doesn't want anyone to find out that she can't read, and so she plays up in school a lot to kind of try and draw attention away from the fact that she's not doing her work and like she can't really read. And it follows her as she gets a new teacher who really takes on board what is happening to her and tries to help her, and like gets her diagnosed with dyslexia and tries to help her move forward with that and learn techniques on how to get through life. And it's just a really lovely story of friendship and support and good teachers and a supportive family, and it just really warmed my heart. It was a really, really lovely read, and I think it's a really great book for children to read, well, like children-ish to read, because I think it has a really great message and it just really made me happy. I then read One Day in December by Josie Silver, and I gave this 3.5 stars. I was really mixed about this book because I loved basically the entire plot of this book. I loved the characters, I was so engaged, but I was just really unhappy with the ending. I knew it was coming, but I just didn't want it to. I was kind of hoping she would, like, you know, throw a curveball. She didn't. But basically this follows our main character over, like, I think sort of like 10 years of her life, and we start off, like, basically we follow her like every Christmas, and we start off with her on the bus when she's this stranger who's got off the bus, and they meet eyes, and it's like love at first sight, and they both kind of try, well, like she tries to get off the bus and he was gonna get on the bus, but they ended up missing each other, and she like tries to find him for like a year with no luck, and she's gutted because she thought she just had this connection, which I do think is a bit dumb, but it was a cute setup, okay? But then one day her best friend brings home the boy she's been dating for a while, and it's the boy from the bus, and her best friend knows about the boy from the bus, but our main character doesn't want to tell her best friend that that's who it is because she's like really in love with him, and she doesn't want to get in the way of her best friend's happiness, which is a good thing. But basically it follows them over 10 years and their changing relationships and their lives, and yeah, I really loved it. It was really engaging, but I was just super unhappy with the ending, so that's really brought it down in my opinion. I then read The Bride Test by Helen Huang, which I gave 3 stars. This is a romance book that follows our two main characters, Kai and Esme, and Esme is asked to come over from Thailand to try and marry Kai by Kai's mother, and so they live together, and she likes him and he kind of likes her, but they don't really start a relationship, and there's a lot of miscommunication, and it's just like following them and their romance. But it also follows Esme and her drive to become successful and to learn and to educate herself, and it was so inspiring, and so was my absolute favourite thing about this book was her love for learning and her want to improve herself and to want a better life for herself and to want to be independent and a strong woman, and that was just incredible. And also Kai has autism, and although I don't have autism, I am disabled, and I really appreciated that Kai's autism wasn't swept under the rug. Like, his needs were conveyed and they were very clear that he had different needs to other people, but it didn't make him automatically unlovable, which happens so often in media. And so I really appreciated that he was still seen as a man that Esme could want. And I loved Kai and Esme both as separate characters, and I really loved their story, but I just didn't really care about their romance as much. So it was an okay read, 3 stars. I liked it, but romance just isn't my favourite genre, so that's more of a me problem than a problem with the book. I then read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Don't need to tell you what this book is about because everyone knows what this book is about. I didn't really like it. I'm just not a Dickens person. I don't like his writing. I've never liked any classics by him, and I thought I would like this one because I do like the story, but I just hate his writing so much. So yeah, I didn't really enjoy reading this. I listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook was literally like 3 hours, and it was like painful to get through. I then read A Bear Called Paddington, the first book in the Paddington series, because I watched the 2 movies again recently. I've watched them so many times and I love them so much, and I saw that the audiobooks for Paddington were available, and I thought I would try them out and see what they're about, and they're just lovely, like so lovely. I think I've read like 8 or 9 of them now because I use them to fall asleep, and they're just so lovely. Follows a bear called Paddington who used to live in darkest Peru, but his Aunt Lucy sends him to London so that he can have a better life because she is going to the home for retired bears, and it's just accepted that he's a bear. Like, it's not weird that he's a bear. He's a talking bear who gets adopted by the Brown family, and it basically follows his antics as he lives in London, and it's the most charming stories ever. Like, I love them so much. I know they're for big children basically, but they are the most heartwarming, funny, lovely stories, and they help me fall asleep, and they're just very, very comforting. And originally I didn't know if I would like put them on Goodreads to say that I'd read them because they are quite short, but then I realised that they're like 100 to 150 pages, some of them are a bit longer, and like most like graphic novels and stuff are shorter than that, so I figured it was fine. And I don't know if anyone thought it was weird that I was reading so many Paddington books, but I like comforting things at night, so I kept reading them. I then reread Jenny Han. I then reread To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han for the 6 billionth time. I have the audiobook and I literally listen to it like all the time, and I give it 5 stars as usual. This follows our main character Lara Jean, and she has written 5 love letters to boys she's had a crush on or who she's been in love with, and she writes a letter once she's like done with her crush, and she writes down everything she would want to say to them and puts it in a letter and then puts it away in a box in her room so she feels like she's done with all of her feelings. And then one day her letters get mailed out for some reason, and she doesn't know by who or how, and she ends up having to fake date one of them, Peter Kavinsky, because she's trying to save face with another boy and he's trying to save face with his ex-girlfriend. And I'm a hoe for Jenny Han and Lara Jean and Peter Kavinsky. I love it. I then read the second Paddington book. I then read The Huntress by Kate Quinn, which I gave 2.5 stars. It was super long. I think the audiobook was like 18 hours or something, and it was a historical fiction book about this woman who was like a Nazi, I think, and she like killed a lot of people in cold blood, and it follows like 2 main characters, one whose brother was killed by this huntress and one who was with the brother and was almost killed by this huntress, as they try and track her down after the war has finished. And we also follow this girl who's, I don't even remember, she's a photographer, I don't know, she lives with this woman who seems suspicious. And I thought I was really going to love this because I'm really into historical fiction at the moment, and it sounded like a really exciting plot, but it was so boring. Basically nothing happened for like the majority of the book. It was really predictable, and I just did not enjoy my time reading it, like, at all. The ending was good, like the last 15% was like engaging, but the rest of it was just boring. There was a bit of female romance in there, which I appreciated, but yeah, it just was very average. I then read the 13th Paddington for some reason, and then I finished Everything Leads to You by Nina LaCour, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. I loved this book. This book follows our main character Emmy, and she and her best friend are like working like the movie industry. She's a interning set designer, and her friend is something else in film, I can't remember, and they go to an estate sale to like find some pieces for her set, and it's this really famous actor who's died. It's his estate sale, and she finds this record, I think, and then when they get home they find that there was a letter in there, and they try and deliver it, and on their quest to deliver this letter they kind of have to go on like a hunt to find this person to give it to them, and they are starting a new project with a new movie, and Emmy has got a really good job that she didn't expect to get so young, and it just really focuses on her friendship with Charlotte, her romantic relationship with a girl that she starts, and her life in Hollywood and in the movie industry and set designing, and it was just so cool. I loved it so much. I loved the characters, the plot was really engaging, I loved the romance, and just everything about it was fantastic. I loved it. It's literally been on my TBR for like 4 years, and I'm so glad I finally read it. It was definitely not a disappointment, and it was just as good as I'd hoped it would be. And the final book I read in 2019 was Dear Sweet Pea by Julie Murphy, and this is about a girl called Sweet Pea whose parents have recently got divorced because her father announces that he is gay, and her parents try and keep everything really normal, and so they get a house like one house down from her original house, so she can basically have 2 houses like next door to each other to try and keep everything like as normal as possible, because they love her and they respect each other, and it's kind of like Sweet Pea and her relationship to her divorced parents and an ex-best friend who kind of comes back into her life and she like reconciles with, which I thought was really cool. And she lives next door to a woman who does like an agony aunt type job, and she's asked to like send her letters while this woman is away, and she ends up writing some answers to these questions and finds a love for like writing and giving advice, and it was just a really heartwarming book. She is also plus size, so like it had cool like fat rep for middle grade, and it was just so lovely. I gave it 4 stars. It was so heartwarming. I loved Sweet Pea, I loved her family, and I just loved everything about this book. I thought it was a really positive book for young like people, for like middle graders, and I just thought it was really pure and heartwarming and just sent such a great message about a lot of different things, and I really loved reading it. So those are all the books I read in December. I am tired now from talking about so many books. Thank God it's time for me to shut up. But thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Sorry this is so late, and I really hope you enjoyed my end of the year series. Again, I'll like leave them in the cards if you want to go and check them out. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!